Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to the 11th webinar session for Research Skills for Library Liaison. My name is Lynette Woe from Griffith University, and I shall be the moderator today. I also have Sue Hickson from Griffith University and the convener of the Library and Information Services Working Party to help facilitate today's session. Just want to go through a couple of the webinar rules again. Remember, this session is being recorded. If you can, turn off your video. That would be great as it does slow the system down. If you would like to ask a question, just put your hand up and we'll unmute your microphone, or you can use the chat down the bottom to ask questions throughout today's session. Just looking at the collaborative tools on our system, just give me a hands up to indicate that you can hear me and that you've got sound. There should be a little tick icon under your name with next or a smiley face under your name on the participants. Yes, great. And again, there is a little hand under your name, so if you'd like to put up your hand to ask a question, just raise your hand and we'll unmute you. I will now hand it over to Sue to introduce our presenter for today.
Okay, welcome everyone. Our session today is from Kate Galloway. I'll get to her bio in a moment, but we're going to be talking about, or she is rather, is going to be talking about using social media, particularly Twitter, to promote research. So I'm looking forward to this session. Kate draws on her background as a property law solicitor in her academic practice. Her principal research interests are property law and legal education. She's interested in the individualistic conception of property rights and the ways in which this fails to reflect the needs of contemporary society. This is reflected in her PhD research, which she is undertaking through Melbourne Law School. Her teaching is in the area of legal education, focusing on curriculum development. This includes projects on flexible learning, embedding Indigenous perspectives and sustainability. She's presently building on her early work on flexible learning to develop a framework within which to understand digital literacies in the context of the learning and practice of law. Both Kate's research in property law and in legal education are informed by her interest in gender, Indigenous perspectives, digital literacies, sustainability and critical theories. You can follow Kate on Twitter at Kate Galloway. She blogs at kategallowayblogspot.com.au, you know, all the HTTP bits, which has been selected by NLA for archiving in Pandora, and also posts for social media in legal education. We'll pop up those links in the chat session as we go. Kate has written occasional pieces for The Conversation and other online media, and you can read more about Kate on her JCU research profile. So over to you, Kate. Looking forward to it. Thank you.
Thanks very much, Sue and Lynette. I hope everyone can hear me now. Okay, so what we're going to do today is I'll give you my perspective, I guess, as an academic and the way that I've engaged in social media to support my research. And I've, at the end, you know, cognizant of the fact that you guys operate in the academic environment, but with a different role from me, I've suggested a couple of different ways in which perhaps you might seek to engage in the social media environment to support researchers in your own institution. So the first question is, and I don't know whether you're all keen to use the chat function or the thumbs up or the smiley face, but I'm interested to know what your own social media literacy is like, and I wonder how many of you can recognize all of the icons that you see on the screen at the moment. Are there any thumbs up in the chat? No smiley faces. What about most of them? No, some of them. Do we have anyone? Yes, so Sue has most, Graham most, yes. Yes, some, half. Okay, yeah, I agree. I don't know what all of them are myself, but it was an interesting experience just to look at them all together. And of course there's, what's the tree? What's the tree? I don't know what the tree is. I haven't looked that one up. I can look that one up, Graham, and post it afterwards perhaps. So obviously we've got a range of experiences then amongst all of you in terms of social media, and I think probably for me I'd use about 2/3 of the little icons here. One of the really interesting experiences that I've had with social media in terms of the academic context is that often you'll say to people, yes, I'm on Twitter or I blog, and people will say, oh yes, I've been meaning to do that, but I don't have the time. Or other people will say, it's a waste of your time. How do you find the time to do it? Or there are a range of different experiences that people have with social media, and there's a lot of people, not just in the academy, but also out there in society, certainly amongst my age group, who simply don't see the purpose and perhaps have an ideological position that opposes social media. And I think that part of this, and we see this in terms of our children as well, and media representations of social media, and certainly the previous Prime Minister saying that's nothing more than electronic graffiti. There's this negativity towards it. And I've actually seen a much more nuanced approach to social media by those who engage in it. And this piece that I saw on Tumblr probably encapsulates that. And I'm just going to read you this almost poetry. It says, your generation would probably live tweet the apocalypse, you say, and you laugh. You mean it as an insult, and I understand. Or you don't, because the word lies awkwardly on your tongue, stumbles as it leaves your lips, air quotes visible. You mean it as an insult, so you don't understand when I look into your eyes and say yes, because we would. It would be our duty as citizens of this earth to document its end the best way we know, and if that means a second-by-second update of the world going up in flames or down in rain or crushed under the feet of invading monsters, so be it. It would mean a second-by-second update of, I love you, I'm scared, are you all right? Stay close, be brave. It would mean a second-by-second update of the humanity's connection with one another, proof of empathy, love and friendship between people who may never have met in the flesh. So don't throw the word live tweet at me like a dagger meant to tear at my teenage superiority. Because if the citizens of Pompeii, before they were consumed by fire, had a chance to tell their friends and family throughout Rome, I love you, I'm scared, don't forget me, don't you think they'd have taken the chance? So I use that as sort of a framing reference, I guess, and we don't need to use social media in that intimate way in the academy, but certainly it's a means of communication that I think we would be remiss to ridicule or to belittle, and it certainly, in my view, offers a lot of opportunity for us. So the premise of my talk today is, first of all, that social media connects people, that it's connections that allow us to form networks, and importantly, that this serves academic work. And in that respect, I'll be drawing on some of my own experiences with social media, both through blogging, but particularly through Twitter, and the way that this has fed into my academic work and, in my view, enhanced it. Now, I saw this just the other day. For those of you on Twitter, you may be aware of Thesis Whisperer, who's an academic based in Melbourne and who works at the ANU. And she's got a really impressive array of social media skills. And she was playing around with some ideas on Twitter the other day and presented this diagram that I've sort of recast here. But she sees this as the academic shares what they know on social media, that this then cultivates the audience or an audience for the work, which amplifies research impact, resulting in prestige and recognition, and so the cycle goes. And we'll return to this later on in the presentation with some of the reflections on this idea that Thesis Whisperer has, and there's a critique of this already in the last few days, but I think what's important for my purposes here, and the reason that this resonated so much, is this idea of cultivating the audience for the work and the amplification of the research impact. So in thinking about the role of social media in my own practice, I look at this broader conceptualization of scholarship. So, and I've sort of conflated a number of academic conceptualizations in this diagram here, but if my core work revolves around these intersecting ideas of teaching, research and engagement, and these broader ideas of the conception, communication, reflection and staying informed, all of these elements come together for me in the context of social media. So it's not essential to my work, obviously. We can engage perfectly, adequately without it and successfully without it. But there are elements of each of these bubbles, if you like, that are enhanced in my experience through engagement in social media. So what tools do I use? Two key tools, the first of which is blogging, and I've been really lucky, I guess, here at JCU. The research staff and the library staff have encouraged me to post or to report, I guess, within our repository all of my blog posts, which has, I think, supported my blogging and represented my blogging as a scholarly output. And I think that this has really, it's given me a lot of confidence as a researcher, and it's also sort of allowing me to present it as a legitimate output, I guess, of my academic work. So what is it? It's I use the blog that I think Lynette posted, or Sue posted just before, my Blogspot blog. Curl I use a free platform on Blogger, and I've just in the last few days set up a new platform with my own domain name, kategalloway.net, and I've used WordPress for that one for various reasons. And for the latter one, I've just applied for an ISSN, which I've got too, which is part of my overall strategy to, I guess, to legitimise this form of scholarship in a broader academic context. So the role that blogging plays is longer form writing, and there are many sorts of free platforms available. And they're presented in reverse order, so the most recent one comes at the top, and I'm sure most of you would have either looked at or would probably use a blog, so you'd be familiar with that. There's the capacity to have followers of your blog, and what's interested me in setting up the new blog, which only has a couple of posts on it so far, is that people who know your work or who are familiar with your work can follow it, and they receive updates whenever you update it. So you have that ready-made audience. But also, through these blogging platforms, you can follow other people and be alerted to their work when it's updated. Thanks for that, Jackie, for posting the link to the new blog. There's also the comment function, which provides instant feedback from people who are interested in your work, and for me that's part of, I guess, of some of it's peer review, and some of it is just engagement with a broader audience. The advantages of blogging for me are certainly, in contrast to traditional academic publishing, its speed. So if I have an idea, I can get it up really quickly. But certainly, I mean, I've just had a book chapter come out that I wrote, I don't know, 4 years ago. My ideas have changed. You know, my whole worldview has changed, if that's possible, in that time. And to see it coming out now after this long and drawn-out process is, I mean, it's satisfying in one sense, and of course it's valuable and all the rest of it. But I guess I get frustrated with the slow pace of traditional academic publishing. So the advantage of blogging, and some people, again, I'm always surprised by academics who say, oh yeah, I must do something about that. I mean, you don't have to do it, but it's interesting to see that it's such sort of a difficult hurdle, I guess, to surmount. But the advantages, as I've said, are its speed. When I've got an idea, I can sit down and sometimes it might take me a few hours, sometimes much less than that, depending on the nature of the post. But really importantly for me, it provides foundations for other scholarly outputs, including refereed papers or book chapters, and also for my PhD, which I'm presently researching. It provides me also with a way to process ideas, particularly with, I guess, my work on my PhD. When I read a book, I might process the ideas of that book and how it relates to my PhD more broadly through a blog post, which then allows me to discuss these ideas with other people. I share it on Facebook, I share it on Twitter, and I've got a range of discussions going on about my work while the ideas are still fermenting, I guess, in my own mind. The advantages of connecting through my blog, here's an example of a piece in Croaky blog, which is part of Crikey, run by Marie McInerney, and she picked up on one of my blog posts on Twitter and then reposted it with my permission on Croaky blog. This is this amplification idea that Thesis Whisperer was talking about. So this then enhances my standing in terms of the audience for my work, and expands on my scholarly work and I guess my academic outputs. So this isn't a peer-reviewed paper, and it's not cited in the mainstream media, so this is also something, as you'd be aware, that academics are expected to do, is to have this media presence. But there's a really big online media audience out there, and this is what I can manage to engage with, partly through the posts that I make on my own blog. Here's another example of an article that I co-wrote with 2 other legal academics who I met on Twitter, and we wrote an article about our Twitter relationship and how we used Twitter, and we published this article and we put the article on SSRN, and it was picked up by the Financial Review, who didn't interview us but who pretty much quoted the article verbatim out of the blue in this Financial Review article, which then we saw and retweeted on Twitter, and it just kept getting shared, and by the end of the week we had the top grossing paper on SSRN. We had the most downloads of any other paper on SSRN. So it was just this, again, this is this idea of amplification of this paper that we'd written that was a little bit of fun about how we'd met on Twitter and we used Twitter in our teaching, and then all of a sudden it's this big thing in the Financial Review, and then that re-fed back into our SSRN and all of our stats there. So this is this intersection then between online media and academic outputs, if you like, through refereed papers, and the mainstream media, and the amplifying mechanism then, of course, is social media. I should tell you that we subsequently wrote another article that explained how this amplification worked, which was getting fairly meta by this stage. One of the key tools in that amplifying process, so we start off with the blogs and we feed that into the regular academic outputs. But the next amplifying mechanism is Twitter. What is it? It's what they call a microblog, so it has a maximum of 140 characters per post, which appear again in reverse order in your timeline. You can follow people, so you select other tweeters who have interests that intersect with yours, and other people follow you. It allows you to interact with others on Twitter, online, through retweeting their tweets and also through replying to people in response to their tweets. One of the most useful descriptions of Twitter is that it's like being at a giant cocktail party. And this isn't my own idea, it's something that I read, and there's some references at the end of these slides. It's like coming into a party and having a whole range of different conversations occurring all around you. And you can go from group to group, choose just to listen to the conversation, which could be about someone dropping the kids off at school that morning, or it could be about the latest discovery on Mars and the scientific rationalization for the argument of water on Mars. I mean, it could be anything. It could be about Indigenous land tenure in North Queensland, or it could be about where the best holiday destinations are on the Gold Coast. So you can choose just to listen to these conversations, to engage in the conversations, or to drift off into other conversations. You can choose to leave the party at any time, and whenever you choose to rejoin, it's still there. So it's ephemeral, the conversations come and go. Sometimes the same conversation is still going on in a couple of days' time, but the point is that you can choose to engage as much or as little as you want to. The way to connect on Twitter is probably to identify what you want out of it, whether you want it as a social mechanism, whether you want it as professional development. But the way that I approached it certainly was, first of all, to find my interests. So I looked at institutions that might be of interest. I follow a range of different media, mainstream media and online media, universities, for example, government departments. Graham's just pointed out that he's heard Twitter referred to as a continuous fire hydrant of information that you can dip in and out of. I think that's right, Graham, and I think that depending on, or you can make that information work for you if you manage to plug into the flows that best reflect your own interests. And I think for some people who join up, it can be difficult to find a place where you fit in until you find that relevant stream of information. So for me, certainly the institutional accounts are quite beneficial, although you won't necessarily get that personal interaction with those accounts. And so I also looked for academics in my field. And just people who look interesting. There are some people who are just interesting, and one of those in Australia is Mark Colvin, who is a journalist at the ABC who presents PM, and he's one of the Twitter mavens, I think, in Australia. So, you know, that's someone else. He is media, but he tweets a whole lot of very interesting and topical tweets. To create a network then, once you start to find your interests and see the sorts of people who might or accounts that might be interesting to follow, you can then start to develop a network through that clear identification of interests. You can tweet relevant links. You can retweet other people and also reply to others. So that's how you start to develop the networks. And I think that for a lot of people, lurking is a perfectly valid pastime, which is being a member of Twitter and following accounts, but not necessarily tweeting yourself. And that still allows you to see that stream of information. I guess you can work out what people's interests are either by looking at their tweets or by looking at their biographies. So there's a brief biography, and certainly mine identifies the things that I'm interested in. So it says that I'm a legal academic, it says I'm in Cairns, I'm interested in the tropics, I'm interested in rowing, I'm interested in women and social justice issues. So that's a fairly clear articulation of the sorts of things that I would tweet about. As a consequence of joining Twitter, I've developed this multiplex online world, this variety of networks, some of which intersect and some of which operate quite independently. So I follow and am followed by lawyers, academics, feminists, PhD students, rowers, and North Queenslanders. So that's a fairly eclectic group of interests, I think. And what's astounding is how some of them do manage to overlap. So I've got quite a lot of lawyer, rower followers, and we engage quite frequently in these crossover discussions about various things. So that sort of gives you an idea of, and some people have very much more specific accounts. So there are, oh yes, librarian followers. I do actually follow some librarians and do have some librarian followers as well, Jackie. Yes, that's correct. So there are quite niche accounts which would only have, you know, one of those bubbles, for example, or a section, a much smaller section of those bubbles, and they can be really, they're very focused accounts. My account is probably a little bit more diverse than that. So it allows me to stay informed through creating this feed of information. As Graham pointed out earlier, it's like a fire hydrant of information. Because of the range of people that I follow, it's quite diverse, and sometimes there are serendipitous connections, but altogether, all of these ideas and these different sort of spheres of information are fed through and come out in my Twitter feed. You might think that 140 characters is never enough to say anything, and you'd be quite surprised about that, but also because of the importance of linking to resources online is a really good way to maximize the impact of any particular tweet. So here's an example. This is what my feed looks like. This is a screen grab I took some time ago, but you'll see a couple of news accounts there, a news scientist account, and Liberation Tech, which tells me about privacy and the latest things that are happening in IT. So I'm no IT guru, but I stay on top of the headlines at least through having these kinds of accounts coming through. And so I can choose to, or the blue ones of course are hyperlinked, and I can choose to click on those to go and see the full story online. You'll see also the use of hashtags, so you can actually follow those hashtags, and I'll show you what that looks like. You'll see that on these two columns here, I've chosen to follow the hashtag higher ed. Obviously I'm interested in higher education, and also Auslaw is one of mine, Australian law or Australian legal issues. And so this allows me to pick up a stream of information just on those topics by a whole variety of people, many of whom I may not follow on my actual Twitter account, but I can see because these people have used these hashtags. So that's another opportunity also to be able to filter or manage the stream of information that you wish to get. So for someone like me with quite diverse interests, at any one time I might choose to filter my Twitter feed through using this search function for the hashtag of a particular issue that I might be interested in at the time. Does anyone have any questions? Or just if you want to make any marks in the chat room, feel free to stop me at any time or to make a comment or ask anything. I can't see anything in there just at the moment. Do I use, Jackie's just asked if I use a tool to manage the tweets that I receive. Usually, Jackie, I don't. Usually I just have a Twitter feed that looks pretty much like this. It's fairly random, and I just read through or skim through. And I don't read the newspaper anymore. I use Twitter instead when I'm having my coffee in the morning, so I see what's going on. Now that daylight savings kicked in, it's always a bit of a downer because everyone's an hour ahead down south. But of course I have a Twitter feed from all over the world as well. But there are a lot of tools available. So for example, there are a number of what they call Twitter clients. You can use Twitter's own client, which just gives you a direct feed. The ones that you see here, the screen grabs, I've taken from TweetDeck, which is a free app that connects to your Twitter account, and it does allow you to set up these columns. So I could have a number of feeds going all at the same time, one of my Twitter feed and others of various hashtags that I'm following, but also lists. So you can create lists of people that you don't necessarily follow. So I could say I have a librarians list and add people to that list, and then that allows me just to follow that particular interest group, if you like. So in terms of using these tools to build a network, in my experience, or the way that I have used them, is mutually reinforcing. So I use the blog and Twitter to promote each other. I have a Facebook account which is actually a private account, so for those of my actual friends, people who I actually know, as opposed to Twitter where I don't necessarily know people, I do post my blog on there as well, but it's really through Twitter that I get out there. Thanks, Jackie. I see Twitterfall is also a way to manage that Twitter feed. So for building this network, I've got a couple of case studies here of how I've actually used this, and none of this has really been by design. I've discovered this simply through using it, and these things have just kind of evolved. Graham's just made a comment. He uses Rebel Mouse as an archive. I'll have to go and have a look at that. Thanks for that tip, Graham. At the time of the Queensland election earlier this year, a number of colleagues and I around Queensland, and in fact some legal academics down south, were tweeting information about voter identification rights in Queensland, because there was a new requirement in Queensland that voters had to provide identification in order to vote. But if you didn't have ID with you, you were able to sign a statutory declaration and still vote. So in order to engage in this public education campaign, we were tweeting this information about voter ID rights. We also received, I received through some friends who were working on some polling booths in North Queensland, reports that electoral workers had wrongfully refused the right to vote, and they'd sent people home to get their ID. And so we tweeted this along with our campaign about voter rights. And by 6 o'clock or 5:30 that night, I think it was, my account and my colleague's account were both trending nationally. So the story had got up such a head of steam that the metrics were showing that our accounts were essentially going viral on Twitter. This then followed for me I was contacted by media in Brisbane on 4BC Radio and asked to give an interview about voter ID rights and the reports of the wrongful refusal to vote. So, that and this whole experience then resulted in writing an article on how public education as part of legal education can be achieved through using Twitter. So that's a peer-reviewed article. So in terms of this amplification project, I guess, Twitter really fed into that, and it allowed us to fulfill one of the important aspects of being legal educators in terms of public education. Graham's just pointed out that Twitter's a mess for finding things after the event unless there's a hashtag or you've retweeted it or favorited it within your own account. And I think that's true, Graham. It's very, very difficult to do. There's a program called Storify, which I actually use sometimes to capture some of the tweets, or to turn a series of tweets into a story. And the sooner you use that program, the easier it is to find those tweets. Otherwise, I agree with you, it's really, really hard to get a hold of them. Graham's also pointed out that it's good to use for posting a conference with a hashtag, and that's right. You can collect your tweets in a way through the use of the hashtag, and that's what we did with these Queensland election tweets as well. We collected them in a Storify, which then tells you the story of what happened through looking at the tweets, and that's really what you see when you see online press reports where they are quoting various tweets. Often they've used that Storify program. So there are various accounts. This one's called Trends Australia, and you can follow these accounts, and they'll tell you from time to time during the day what's trending, and that's how I knew that I was trending. And look, this is a purely self-serving tweet, but it was just so funny at the time. Thanks, oh, you've been tweeting QLock. That's excellent. Well, we can do a Storify of that afterwards, perhaps. Okay, a question from Dave and Rachel at Bond, who like how I've utilised Twitter. Do many of our students use Twitter as a platform? That's a really interesting question. Thanks for that. Originally, I planned on using Twitter in class, and there are a number of legal academics and other academics who use the hashtag with the subject code when they post things online. I see that some of those lecturers manage to get students to engage with them online, but not many. My students were quite reluctant to go online to actually use Twitter, and I didn't feel, because it's you can get a locked account where no one can see, but many of my students don't like the idea of going online in that context. A few of them I see do follow me, and in some of my subjects I embed a Twitter feed in the subject site so that students can see it, and often I'll do that using the hashtag #OzLaw, and other academics I know will post things and use the hashtag for their subject code and embed the timeline. So There are some examples of subjects that I'm aware of within Australia where students do actually use Twitter in terms of their learning itself. There are a few examples of academics who will embed information using Twitter, but it's not yet, to my knowledge, a regular teaching tool. So you'll see here is are some tweets from Thesis Whisperer, Inga Mewburn, and this is the diagram that I posted early on in the slideshow here, and this is what I first saw the other day when she first tweeted it. And what you'll see is she's pinged a few people on Twitter to see what they think about this diagram, and this is just a small selection of some of the responses that people had to her early thoughts of this diagram. So Deborah Lupton, who's a sociologist, says it's a good one. Brady Robards, who says that he's a sociologist as well, and he poses the question of whether it has to lead to prestige, whether Twitter use can have other outcomes, and then there's some responses also from Joyce Soetzinger. So what you've got here is this thinking in practice. So in the way that I might use a blog to clarify my thoughts, what you see here is Thesis Whisperer using Twitter as a means to get this sort of instant feedback on some of the ideas that she's working with. Sometimes when I'm reading things and things occur to me, I might tweet them too, and it results in discussions about these sorts of ideas. So it can be really useful in terms of engagement in developing your thinking. So you can see that this final idea that I've put in the right-hand column with Joyce Soetzinger, who says that it overlaps with working out loud movement. And this is also, I guess, feeds into this idea of using social media as a way of developing your thinking. And you'll see she's used the hashtag there, WOL. So I followed that and some of the links that she provided and came up with this fabulous page, and there's a link to this at the end in my bibliography for the slides, this fabulous sketch note of what is working out loud. So using social media to build a helpful network, and the way in which you can actually develop these ideas using social media. And I think in the academic context, this is a really valuable tool, and I think that's what Thesis Whisperer was doing when she posted that diagram to begin with. So the second of my own case studies that I just wanted to share with you is, again, to illustrate this idea of developing a network and amplifying research impact. Concerns the anti-bikie laws, which were introduced in Queensland a couple of years ago. And it started off with a blog post on my personal blog. I got a couple of, when I posted that on Twitter, I got a couple of invitations from online media to make some posts. I got one of my posts was reposted on the Motorcycle Riders Association website, the Bikies website, and I had, following that, I had some invitations to come and address, rallies and organisations on the effect of the anti-bikie laws. It then resulted in co-authoring a journal article on the effect of the laws. So that's a regular academic output, I guess. And I just received last week an invitation to submit to a parliamentary inquiry in South Australia, based on what they've indicated is my expertise on organised crime laws. So, and I mean, I've got a relatively extensive list of of interests and research interests, I'd probably have to say to you that organised crime isn't necessarily very high on that list. But what this illustrates is that capacity for amplification of your research and that idea of your expertise through these online media. So that was a really interesting and unintended sort of experiment or consequence of just taking this sort of quite low-key approach early on and developing that reputation, I guess, within that area. So here's how it looks. Here's a selection of screen grabs. The one at the top is the newsletter of the Caston Centre for Human Rights, and so the post that I wrote for them by invitation was the most read article for the year about civil liberties in Queensland. Open Forum in the bottom left corner was another one, and the bikies article was one of the most popular ones that they had on there, and another article for Right Now, which is an online human rights forum as well. And what was really interesting about this also is, I mean, each of the pieces that I wrote was different. It wasn't just a repost of the same work, but there was an alignment to my work, so that for the same amount of research, I was effectively getting a number of different outputs, culminating then in a refereed article. So in terms of bang for your buck, in terms of impact from the same amount of work, in my experience, social media has been one way to really develop that impact from my work. So social media in academic practice, I've reflected on the way in which I myself use it. So I start off with an idea, and if I get up ahead of steam, I'll write a blog post about it. I tweaked the blog and I use that to inform people and to engage with other people in thinking about the idea. This process in the large citrus circle intersects with mainstream scholarly outputs. So it feeds into mainstream scholarly outputs such as research, refereed articles, and those in turn feed also back into this social media framework and mode of engaging. So I can, when an issue is in the news, I can tweet from my backlog of articles that are publicly available on SSRN or on other law journals. So I can say, oh, you might be interested in this article that I wrote some time ago on this topic. And you see, when I look at the metrics for those articles, you'll see a spike in downloads or views on those articles. So I can always keep those, my older work in the public consciousness through judicious tweeting of them. So Lynette's just reminding everyone to fill out a survey for today's session, and she's put the SurveyMonkey link up there. So reflecting on librarians' roles, and there's a number of librarians or university librarians and other librarians who are active on Twitter, and some of them are individual accounts and some of them are library accounts, and I follow a number of university libraries on Twitter. There's a number of different ways that I think librarians might be able to, or that you might already engage through Twitter. One is as curators. So I think you guys are in a really good position, depending on the particular focus of your own library and the researchers that you might work with, to use hashtags and develop lists of relevant people to serve as curators other people. So, and I mean, that's, I guess, part of your role in an analog world and in other online fora, but I guess Twitter's another place where you could usefully offer that service, but also being promoters. So if you know who your researchers are, one of the ways, and I've discussed this with other colleagues on Twitter about our blogs, and I say, you know, I haven't posted anything in 3 months and I've had more site visits on my blog than I had in the previous whatever, you know, and what we work out is that if you get onto a librarians network, because we know that librarians have these special networks, if your blog is known to librarian networks, then you will be guaranteed to get regular hits on your blog. So you guys are actually such an important gateway, in my opinion, for people to access the work of scholarly blogs. So, and that's done through sharing in the networks, but also knowing, I guess, who your researchers are. And if researchers in your own institutions are as lucky as I've been with the librarians here, who are just so supportive of my own engagement in social media, I think that's such a valuable gateway for academics to be able to showcase their research. But also, as part of that, and I think that links in with this whole idea of curation and promotion, is serving as facilitators. So linking people with people and linking people with information. And I see that, for example, there are some libraries, the University of Melbourne Law Library, and I think that they're quite close with the Melbourne University Law Review. And if there's something in the news, then they'll go through the back catalogue and they'll promote an article that is relevant in that context, or they'll always use they'll refer to the author if they're on Twitter. So that you guys are in a good position, I think, to be able to, as you, depending on where you're at with Twitter, whether you're active on it or whether you're just beginning, but for those who are more active, to be able to introduce people and to make those links, but also, as you'd expect, to link people with information. Yeah, so Graham's just pointed out it takes time and effort to get to the stage of being curator, promoter or facilitator, and it's taken 6 years to build up a following. Graham, that is absolutely correct. And I've, you know, when I first started on Twitter and I'd see people who had, you know, 3,000 followers or something, I thought, gosh, I'm never going to get to that. It does take time, and it takes, I think there's a knack to developing that following, and I think the more followers that you have, the more are likely to follow. In terms of amplification, I'm making this up, I don't have any evidence for this, which is a bit naughty of me, but I suspect that within librarian circles that you have more capacity for amplification, not necessarily online, but through your other networks, even if you aren't people who have the most followers or whatever. Okay. Yes, well, loud or have the capacity to develop networks. And I think maybe that's because librarians are far more information literate and are far more conscious of what those networks might be, that you can plug into networks outside social media. So you even as a lurker on social media, you can then let other people know about things that you found out online. That would be my suspicion. But those were just some preliminary ideas that I had when I was thinking about how you guys might seek to sort of plug into the sort of work that I'm playing with in social media. And that's Okay, thanks to you guys at Dixon. See you later. And that's it. So that's my last post on my new blog page. So if anyone's got any questions, please feel free to ask, or you can always email me or tweet me afterwards. I'd love to hear from you.
Okay, no questions? Okay, thanks very much, Kate. It was really information that is really relevant to all librarians, I think, at the moment. So it's really interesting. So thanks very much. For everyone, if you could just give a round of applause to Kate, please, under your little smiley icon. There you go. Thank you. I'd just like to remind you, I can't talk today, I'm sorry about that. I'd like to remind you that the next session is our last session, and Sue O'Brien from UQ will be talking to us about ethics, integrity and the Australian Code for the Responsible Conduct of Research. And it is at 12:30 Australian Eastern Standard Time, so it's different to all of the other sessions that we've run. So 12:30 Australian Eastern Standard Time for our next and last session. So thanks very much. Jackie, did you want to add anything?
Yeah, so thanks, Sue, and thanks, Kate. That was so wonderful. It's always a pleasure to hear you speak. I do have one small thing that I could add to what you were just closing on, and that's for librarians could follow other accounts like at Trove Australia, so that's the National Library of Australia Twitter account, and that then can greatly extend our network. And if Trove then retweets the tweet, you're extending it that much further. So an account I recommend.
Okay.
Yeah.
Well, I think we're done. Thank you, everyone, for attending. Thank you.
Thanks, everyone.